My name's Tyler, and I turned 21 last summer. Big milestone, right? Supposed to be the kind of birthday you remember forever. Drinks, laughs, maybe some chaos, but mostly the kind of night where you finally feel like your life is your own. That's what I hoped for anyway. What I got instead was the kind of memory that burns a hole in your stomach when you think about it too long. And it all started with a dinner. Just a family dinner. Or so I thought. I should probably explain a bit about the cast of characters first. My parents, Sharon and Rick, are traditional. Not in the wholesome, homemade pie and good values kind of way. More like appearances are everything. Neighbors should envy us. Why can't you be more like your sister, kind of traditional? And then there's her, Jessica, my older sister. She's 27, works in corporate PR, has a condo downtown, and probably owns more beige pantsuits than I've owned socks in my life. She's the golden child, and I mean that in the full sense. She could probably stab someone with a salad fork at Thanksgiving, and my mom would say the other person must have provoked her. That kind of golden. Growing up, Jessica always had this unspoken spotlight. Straight A's, debate team, early internships, you name it, she did it. And I didn't resent that at first. Honestly, as a kid, I just wanted her to like me. I'd trail after her like a puppy, always trying to impress her, but she treated me like I was something stuck to the bottom of her shoe. Over time, I stopped trying and started focusing on my own thing. I got into coding, started freelancing small web projects in high school, even built an e-commerce site for a local store when I was 17. I didn't wave it around. I wasn't trying to compete with her. I just wanted to be seen for who I was. But in our house, being seen meant having a trophy or a business card with a fancy title. My parents never really understood what I did. They'd smile politely when I talked about landing a new client, then change the subject to Jessica's latest work event like I hadn't spoken at all. It was like living in a house where the ceiling light followed only one person and the rest of us were expected to stay in the shadows. So, when my 21st birthday came around, I honestly didn't expect much. A cake, maybe. Some awkward hugs. But then my mom called me a few days before and said they were taking me out to dinner. Just the family, she said. We made a reservation downtown. It was at this Italian place Jessica loved. Expensive, always booked out weeks in advance. That surprised me. I thought, maybe they're trying. Maybe this is finally my moment. I even remember getting ready that night. I actually cared. Picked a clean button-down, fixed my hair, even ironed my jeans, which I never do. I showed up 5 minutes early, trying not to look too eager, and found them already seated. Jessica was at the head of the table, of course, wearing something sharp and smug like always. My mom gave me that cheek kiss she reserves for public settings. My dad gave a nod and went back to his glass of wine. We ordered, chatted about the weather, and the conversation immediately shifted to Jessica's job. Something about her new account, the hours she's been working, how her boss trusts her with the big stuff. I smiled, nodded, tried to interject a few times with stories from my freelance gigs, but it was like throwing pebbles at a freight train. They just kept going. Then the food came, and with it, the moment that still sits heavy in my gut. Jessica stood up, glass in hand, and said, "I'd like to make a toast." My mom clapped lightly. My dad looked proud. I figured maybe, just maybe, she was going to say something nice. Something about my birthday. Instead, she raised her glass and said, "To promotions, to hard work paying off, and to some of us actually doing something with our lives." I blinked. My smile froze in place. I looked around, expecting someone to say, "Hey, that's not fair," or even just shift uncomfortably. But they all laughed. My mom laughed the hardest, like Jessica had just cracked the greatest joke in history. That's when I realized I wasn't the guest of honor. I was the prop, the extra chair. This wasn't my birthday dinner. It was Jessica's celebration, hijacking my night like it was her birthright. I sat through the rest of the meal in silence, chewing through a lump of disappointment that made the food taste like cardboard. No one mentioned my birthday again. No cake. No candle. Not even a sarcastic, "You're finally legal." Just business talk and Jessica's smug smile soaking up every compliment like it was sunlight. When the bill came, they all instinctively looked at me. I don't even think they realized it. My dad made a half-hearted reach for his wallet, but my mom waved him off and said, "Tyler can cover it. He's been doing all that computer stuff, right?" Like my work was a hobby, like I owed them for daring to sit at the same table. So I paid. Quietly. No arguments. Just handed over my card. signed the receipt, and stood up. "I've got an early client call tomorrow," I said. It was a lie. I just couldn't sit there another second. Jessica said something smug. I don't even remember what. And my mom gave me a distracted, "Happy birthday, sweetie," without looking up from her espresso. That night, I sat in my car for a long time before starting the engine. I wasn't even mad yet. Just hollow. Like someone had scooped out everything I was looking forward to and left the shell behind. But something in me shifted. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I just stared out the windshield and thought, they really don't see me at all. And that was the last time I let them laugh at me. What happened after that? Well, that's where the Rayall story begins. Because a year later, everything flipped, and Jessica's carefully curated life, it cracked in front of everyone. And I didn't even have to lift a finger to expose the truth. For a while, after that birthday dinner, I kept my distance. Not in an angry, passive-aggressive way. I just stopped showing up for things that clearly weren't meant for me. No more family brunches where Jessica held court. No more texts about family updates that were just long-winded essays about her job, her condo, her dating life. I stayed polite, surface level. I'd respond to messages with brief but cordial replies, sent the obligatory "Merry Christmas" texts, even sent my mom flowers on Mother's Day. I wasn't trying to make a scene. I just didn't have the energy to keep pretending I belonged in a room where no one saw me. Instead, I threw myself into work. I doubled down on my freelance business, web development, UI/UX design, SEO optimization, whatever people would pay for. And slowly, things started to click. Clients referred me to other clients. I got better, faster. I invested in a proper setup, learned how to pitch projects, and even took a few business courses online. Within 6 months, I wasn't just scraping by. I was earning more than enough to live comfortably. By the end of the year, I had a few monthly retainers and a couple of corporate gigs that paid almost too well for what I was doing. But I kept it quiet. No LinkedIn humble brags, no status updates, no family group chat announcements. Part of it was pettiness, I'll admit that. But mostly, I just didn't want to offer them anything else to belittle or compare. I wanted peace. To exist without being a footnote in someone else's toast. Still, they didn't stop reaching out completely. My mom would send random messages every now and then like, "Jess is presenting at a conference in New York. Isn't that amazing?" Or, "Your sister just bought a new coffee table that's hand-carved from reclaimed barnwood. Can you believe how adult she is?" Every message was another reminder of where I stood, the side character in the Jessica show. But then something changed. It was small at first, barely noticeable. My dad called me one evening out of the blue. We hadn't spoken in months, and even then our calls were usually dry and obligation-driven. This time, though, he sounded different, less stiff, curious. "So, what exactly do you do again?" he asked, like he was trying not to sound too interested. I told him about a client I'd just finished a site redesign for, a mid-sized logistics company. How they'd seen a noticeable uptick in engagement and conversions after the new launch. He whistled. "That sounds pretty big." "Yeah," I said, keeping my voice casual. "It's going well." There was a long pause before he said, "Good for you, son." That was it. No lecture. No comparison. Just 6 words. But they landed hard. For once, it felt like maybe, just maybe, he saw me. Of course, it didn't last. A few weeks later, I got a group text from my mom. She was planning a family getaway for a long weekend at a lakeside cabin she'd rented. She said it would be just like old times, which was funny because old times usually meant Jessica yelling at me for breathing too loudly or stealing her charger, followed by my mom blaming me for ruining the mood. I almost didn't go. I stared at the message for a solid 10 minutes, debating it. But something in me wanted to test the waters. Maybe things had changed. Maybe my silence had made them think. So I said yes. When I got there, Jessica was already holding court, telling a story about how she single-handedly saved a campaign that was on the verge of collapse. My mom hung on every word. My dad nodded dutifully. I walked in with a bottle of wine and a smile. "Tyler," my mom said, standing to hug me like I was a returning soldier. "You made it." Jessica looked up from her seat by the fireplace, wine glass in hand, and gave me a once-over. "Wow, you look different." "Thanks," I said. "It's called hydration and sleep. You should try it." She smirked. My mom laughed nervously. My dad pretended to check his phone. That weekend was exactly what I expected, and worse. Every conversation somehow circled back to Jessica. When I mentioned I'd signed a new client, my mom said, "Oh, that's nice. Jessica just got invited to a leadership summit in Chicago." When I offered to cook dinner one night, Jessica stepped in and said, "Actually, I already planned the meals." She even rewrote the grocery list I brought, crossing out items in front of me like I'd handed her a coloring book. I gritted my teeth through it. I kept my head down and reminded myself it was just 3 days. Just a long weekend. Then came the betrayal. It was the last night. We were sitting around the fire pit outside, wrapped in blankets, the lake behind us still and silent. My mom was reminiscing about how fast the kids had grown up and how both of you turned out so successful in your own ways. I almost laughed at that one. Jessica was nursing her third glass of red wine when she turned to me and said, "You know, I've always been worried about you." I looked up from my mug of tea. "Oh," she nodded solemnly, like a saint. "Yeah, I mean, you were always kind of lost. Not very driven. Just floating around, trying random things." My mom nodded along like Jessica was quoting scripture. "But I'm glad you're doing better," Jessica continued, swirling her wine. "Even if it's just little tech gigs. It's nice you found something that makes you feel useful." I stared at her. My dad stared at the fire. No one said a word. I stood up slowly and said, "Actually, I just finished negotiating a contract for a startup's full-stack development. 6 months, $90,000. Jessica blinked. My mom laughed like I told a joke. "That's adorable, sweetie." "It's real," I said. "But thanks." Jessica scoffed. "Come on. You expect us to believe that? What startup pays you that much?" I don't know what made me do it. Maybe it was the wine, or maybe I'd just had enough. But I pulled out my phone, opened the contract, and handed it to my dad. He read it. Then he read it again. "This is real." I nodded. He handed it to my mom. She looked like she'd just bitten into a lemon. Jessica stared at the flames like she could will them to jump up and swallow me whole. "I guess," she said tightly. "Tech scams are getting more convincing." That's when I lost it. I didn't yell. I didn't throw anything. I just stood there, staring at the people I shared DNA with, and felt something in my chest snap. Not like a violent break, more like a clean tear of paper. Quiet. Final. "You know," I said, "I used to want you all to be proud of me. I really did. I thought if I worked hard enough, got good enough, maybe one day you'd see me as more than Jessica's awkward little brother. But now, I honestly don't care. You can sit here and pretend I'm making it up. You can roll your eyes and dismiss me. But the world outside this fire pit sees me. My clients see me. My friends see me. And that's enough." No one said anything. The fire cracked. I went inside, packed my bag, and left that night without saying goodbye. A few days later, I got an email from Jessica. The subject line was, "We need to talk." The body was short. No greeting. No sign-off. Just one line. "How did you get that contract?" I've been trying to pitch that same startup for months. That's when I realized she wasn't just insecure. She was watching me. Competing, even. And that, right there, was the crack. I didn't reply to Jessica's email. Not right away. Not because I didn't have something to say. Believe me, I did. But because something about that one line hit me deeper than I expected. "How did you get that contract?" It wasn't curiosity. It was disbelief laced with entitlement. Like the deal was hers by default, and I'd somehow stolen it from her. And that wasn't just arrogance. It was fear. For the first time in our lives, Jessica was afraid I'd done something she couldn't control, couldn't top, and couldn't explain away to herself. But here's the thing. I didn't want her afraid of me. I didn't want revenge. Not really. What I wanted, what I'd always wanted, was respect. The quiet kind. The kind you don't have to ask for. The kind you earn just by being you. Still, that email marked a shift. I stopped looking at Jessica like she was some untouchable idol on a pedestal. I saw her for what she was, a woman who'd spent her whole life building a tower out of praise and polished resumes, but never figured out what to do if someone else climbed higher. The weeks after the cabin trip were weirdly quiet. My mom didn't text me. My dad didn't call. Jessica didn't follow up. And for a while, that silence stung. I kept checking my phone like a kid waiting for a sorry that never came. But eventually, the sting faded. Silence started to feel like peace. I used it to focus. That $90,000 contract? It was real. I was building a new user portal for a logistics startup in Austin. Clean backend, integrated dashboard, mobile optimization. 6-month timeline, full creative control. It wasn't glamorous, and no one was toasting me for it. But for once, I didn't need them to. And just like that, I began to build something of my own. Not just income, not just work. Stability. I moved out of the tiny apartment I'd been renting since college and into a small but modern loft. Open kitchen, exposed brick, decent light. It wasn't in the best part of town, but it felt like mine. I bought my first real couch. Not used. Not clearance. Mine. I set up a proper workspace, standing desk, dual monitors, whiteboard wall. I even started going to a co-working space twice a week, just to be around other people who got it. I didn't share any of this with my family. Not because I was hiding it, but because I was protecting it. It was the first time in my life I'd built something without their eyes on it, and it felt sacred. But it wasn't all up and to the right. Far from it. There were nights I couldn't sleep, days I couldn't focus. Sometimes I'd catch myself rereading old texts from my mom, wondering what it would take for her to just say, "I'm proud of you." I missed things I shouldn't have missed, inside jokes with my dad, Sunday dinners that weren't about comparison. Even the passive-aggressive arguments with Jessica. There's something weirdly comforting about old dysfunction. You know exactly where the landmines are. Being away from it feels too quiet. And then came the phone call. It was late. Around midnight. My phone lit up with a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer, but something in my gut told me to pick up. "Tyler," a shaky voice said. "It's Jessica." I sat up in bed, instantly alert. "Is everything okay?" She sniffled. "Can we talk?" That was the first time I'd ever heard her cry. I told her to hold on and stepped out onto the balcony, closing the sliding door behind me. The night air was cold against my skin. "What's going on?" I asked. She let out a shaky breath. "I got let go." I blinked. "From your job?" "They called it a restructure," she said bitterly. "My whole department's being realigned. But I know what it is. They're cleaning house." And I was the last to know. For a second, I didn't know what to say. This was Jessica. Golden girl. Untouchable. She wasn't supposed to get fired. She was supposed to fire people. "I'm sorry," I said. And I meant it. "I don't know what to do," she whispered. "I've never not worked. I've never even been unemployed. I don't know how to tell mom and dad. They'll freak out." I hesitated. "You could tell them the truth." She laughed, bitter and small. "Yeah, right. So they can treat me like they treated you." That one hit harder than I expected. I leaned against the railing, silent. "You were right. You know," she said, voice cracking. "About everything. They pit us against each other. They made me feel like I had to be better than you all the time. And I let them. I bought into it. I let it poison how I treated you." It was the closest thing to an apology I'd ever heard from her. We talked for over an hour. She told me about the slow unraveling at work, the coworkers who got icy, the projects quietly reassigned, the anxiety, the insomnia, the way she felt like she was drowning in a pool she used to swim through effortlessly. And I told her the truth, that I didn't hate her, that I used to admire her, that all I ever wanted was to be seen, not compared, not dismissed. When we finally hung up, something between us had shifted. Maybe not repaired, but softened, realigned. Over the next few weeks, she called a few more times. Nothing intense, just check-ins. She even asked for advice on freelancing, said she might try to build her own thing, said she was tired of corporate games. I offered tips, resources, contacts. I didn't hold back. Then, one morning, I got a text from my mom. "Can we talk? Please." I ignored it for an hour. Then two. But eventually, curiosity won out. I called her. She picked up immediately. "Hi, sweetie," she said, a little too cheerfully. "I heard from Jessica you've been doing really well." There it was. "Yeah," I said carefully. "I've been okay. I didn't realize you were working with startups." "That's impressive. You must be really busy." "I am." There was a pause. Then she dropped the act. "Tyler, why didn't you tell us? We didn't know you were doing so well." "Because you never asked." That silence. It said more than anything she could have said. She tried to pivot. "We were thinking of having a family dinner soon. Maybe next weekend? You could bring your girlfriend, if you have one. Or a friend. We'd love to celebrate everything you've accomplished." I almost laughed. "Celebrate me? Now? After years of invisibility?" "I'll think about it," I said. "But I'm not sure." She hesitated. "Okay. Well, just let me know. We're really proud of you, Tyler. All of us are." I didn't say anything. I just said goodbye and hung up. Because here's what I realized. I didn't need them to celebrate me. Not anymore. My life wasn't built for their approval. It was built on quiet hours, late nights, self-doubt, and resilience. On showing up for myself when no one else did. That was my real birthday gift, just a year late. And as for Jessica, well, her apology wasn't the end of the story. It was just the start of a new chapter. Because the deeper we talked, the more cracks began to show. And one day, without warning, she let something slip. A name, a transaction, a favor my parents pulled years ago that I was never supposed to know about. And once I started digging, I realized just how far they went to keep me in the dark. I wasn't just the forgotten child. I was intentionally sidelined. And when I found out why, that's when the real unraveling began. I don't know if Jessica realized what she'd said the moment it left her mouth, or if it took a beat to register, but I heard it clearly. We were on a late-night call again, one of those quiet, surprisingly vulnerable conversations that had become weirdly normal between us now. She was telling me about how competitive her old workplace had become, how everyone had their claws out and no one shared leads, not even with friends. Then she laughed and said, kind of like that summer dad pulled your college application. There was a silence. A thick, strange pause. I blinked. What? She froze. Wait, forget I said that. No, Jessica. What did you just say? I don't know, she stammered. I was tired. I didn't mean. Jessica, I said, slowly and firmly. What do you mean Dad pulled my college application? I could hear her breathing on the other end. The way someone does when they know a door's been opened and there's no way to close it without going through. She exhaled. You weren't supposed to know. I mean, it wasn't even totally your fault. You were kind of all over the place that year. Remember? You missed that deadline, and Mom panicked, and... Which deadline? She paused again. The early decision one. For Columbia. My jaw clenched. I remembered that week. I had everything ready. My essays, my transcript, the rec letters. I didn't miss the deadline. I submitted everything. I even got the confirmation email. But I never heard back. No rejection. No wait list. Just radio silence. I assumed the portal glitched or I messed something up. You're saying Dad canceled my application? I asked, my voice low. He technically withdrew it, she said. I think Mom made him. I'm not sure. I just remember them saying something about how New York wasn't a good fit for you. They didn't want you to feel pressured. You were so unsure about everything then. I wasn't unsure, I snapped. I was scared, but I was ready. Jessica fell quiet. That night, I didn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling of my loft for hours, replaying everything I could remember from that year. Senior year, 17 years old, full of self-doubt but hopeful. I had wanted out. Out of that house. Out of that orbit where everything revolved around Jessica. I thought Columbia would be my shot to finally be seen as my own person. They took that from me. Not out of love. Not out of concern. But because they decided who I was, and they needed me to stay in my box so Jessica could shine brighter in hers. And I realized then, with a clarity that was almost painful, it had never been about what I deserved. It was always about control. That was my breaking point. Not the toast. Not the birthday dinner. This. Because it wasn't just favoritism anymore. It wasn't just passive neglect. It was sabotage. Deliberate. Hidden. And it explained so much. It explained why my dad always got nervous when I mentioned scholarships. Why my mom changed the subject whenever college came up. Why I never got a clear answer about the missing confirmation. It explained the guilt I carried for years, thinking I had failed, when it was them who pulled the plug. I knew then I couldn't let it go. Not because I needed revenge for the sake of drama, but because I needed to reclaim something. My own story. My own worth. And if they weren't going to give it to me, I'd take it. But I wasn't going to blow up at them. That would be too easy. Too emotional. And it would let them control the narrative again. See? Tyler's too sensitive. Overreacting. Unstable. No. If they wanted a facade, I'd give them one. Polished. Professional. Smiling. And beneath that, I'd build a plan. First, I needed confirmation. Something concrete. Jessica's word was enough for me. But if I ever wanted to confront them, or use it strategically, I'd need more. So I reached out to Columbia. I crafted a calm, polite email requesting any archived application data from the year I applied. I explained I was doing a personal project on college admissions and wanted to review my own file for educational purposes. They replied a week later. There was a file. An application. An acceptance. Wait, an acceptance? I read the email 3 times. According to their records, I had been accepted, conditionally. They'd sent an offer pending final grades, along with housing options and next steps. I never received it. It had been mailed to my home address, my parents' address. Around the same time, my mom told me Columbia must have passed and that I should start looking at local community colleges. I sat there, holding that email, hands trembling. I wasn't just withdrawn. I was accepted. I had a shot. And they never told me. That was the moment everything crystallized. They knew. They read that letter. They saw the offer. And they chose to hide it. Not because they thought I'd fail, but because they were afraid I might succeed. Because if I left, if I grew, if I built a life outside their reach, I'd stop being the contrast to Jessica's glow. And I was done being the backdrop. I printed the email, framed it, hung it above my desk like a battle flag. Then I got to work. I didn't want to just burn bridges. I wanted to redesign the entire landscape. The first step was visibility. Quiet, professional visibility. I updated my website, added client testimonials, project breakdowns, success metrics. I started posting on LinkedIn, casually sharing accomplishments. A redesigned SaaS dashboard here. A 30% boost in conversions there. Nothing flashy. Just consistent, undeniable proof that I wasn't just doing little tech gigs. I was running a legitimate, thriving business. I joined some local entrepreneur meetups. Gave a few free workshops on UX design. One of them got picked up in a local business newsletter. And then, because fate has a sense of humor, I got invited to speak at a regional tech conference. Guess who else was speaking? Jessica. Except she wasn't a keynote anymore. She was part of a panel. The kind you get invited to when you're still figuring things out. And me? I was asked to close the conference. Solo. It wasn't personal. The organizers just liked my story. Young developer, self-made, building bridges between UI design and marketing performance. They didn't know my family would be there. But I did. I called Jessica the week before. Hey, I said. Saw your name on the speaker list. Congrats. She sounded unsure. Yeah, I didn't expect you to be there too. I'm doing the closing talk, I said casually. Should be fun. A beat of silence. Oh, let me know if you want to meet up after. Would be good to catch up. I'll think about it. That was enough. I knew my parents would be there. They always showed up for Jessica's events. I also knew they wouldn't be expecting me to be on stage. So I made sure my talk was airtight. Polished. Charismatic. Technically solid. No bitterness. No family digs. Just success. I rehearsed it 20 times. Focused on value. Clarity. Confidence. Because I didn't want them to see me angry. I wanted them to see me untouchable. And this conference? It was just the first domino. But before I could deliver the knockout, I had one more move to make. One final layer to the setup. Because there was one person I hadn't looped in yet. My grandmother. My dad's mother. The only relative who had ever treated me like more than Jessica's sidekick. We hadn't spoken in months, but I knew she'd want to hear the truth. And I knew she'd have stories of her own. I called her and asked if we could talk. She invited me over for tea. And what she told me that afternoon, it changed everything. Because apparently, sabotaging me wasn't just a one-time thing. It was a pattern. And once I had the full picture, I realized I wasn't the only one they'd lied to. Not even close. The next phase? Leverage. But we'll get there. Because first, I had to take the stage. I took the stage with calm, deliberate steps. The auditorium wasn't massive, but the lights made it feel like the world had narrowed to just the stage and the hush of anticipation waiting in the crowd. I could see silhouettes, tech founders, designers, recruiters, a few local press seats. And in the fourth row, just barely visible in the light, were my parents. Mom in her usual pearls and blazer. Dad, stiff-backed, unreadable. And between them, Jessica, arms folded tight, face unreadable. They had no idea what was coming. I'd practiced this talk so many times that I could have done it in my sleep. It was about the overlap between design and function, how user empathy leads to better products. But underneath that, it was my story, layered in metaphors. Real, but coded. And as I spoke, I wove in phrases that only certain people would catch. You can't build a useful product if you don't listen to the user, I said, eyes casually drifting toward my parents. If you assume you know better than the person you're building for, you'll lose them. Polite chuckles. Worse, you might trap them in something they didn't choose. And they'll carry the weight of that for years, thinking it was their fault the system failed. No one flinched. But I knew. I closed the talk with a story, true, simplified, untraceable, about someone who thought they failed to launch. until they learned someone else had unplugged the rocket. The applause when I finished was steady, respectful, sincere, not roaring, but earned. I didn't look at my parents when I walked off stage. Later, I ducked out early from the speaker dinner. I wasn't interested in small talk with startup bros or panels about Series B funding. I had a meeting. Jessica was waiting for me in the corner of the hotel lobby, a coffee in her hand, anxiety in her posture. She stood when she saw me. "You killed it," she said. "Thanks," I replied, sitting across from her. "You did fine too." She looked away, then back. "You know they came just for me." "I know," I said. "That's what makes it better." She laughed under her breath. "They were furious after. Mom said you embarrassed them." "Did I?" "No," she said. "You told the truth. Just not loud enough for them to realize it." I sipped my drink. "Speaking of truth." She nodded slowly, the weight settling in her shoulders. I talked to Grandma again. My grandmother had given me more than just old stories. She'd shown me a box, one my parents had left at her place years ago. It held records, school reports, old emails, even a copy of that Columbia letter with my name on it. She had saved it quietly. She always suspected something. But Jessica had something else. "I found an old email thread between Mom and her friend," she said, handing me her phone. "From the admissions office." I read it. It was a conversation from the year I applied. My mom thanking her friend for helping redirect Tyler's file so he wouldn't be wasting time on something that wasn't realistic for his temperament. It was manipulative, smug, and surgical. A single email chain that proved everything I'd feared. I looked up. Jessica was watching me. "I used to think they protected me," she said. "But now I think they used me to justify everything they did to you." I nodded. "They needed one of us to shine so they could feel like good parents. And they picked early." She leaned back, exhausted. "What are you going to do?" I didn't answer, but I already knew. The next week, I updated my will. That sounds dramatic, but it was practical. I'd recently incorporated my business. I had assets now, intellectual property, contracts, a future. I made Grandma my emergency contact and my sole beneficiary. And then I filed paperwork to establish a scholarship, quietly, through an anonymous trust, for students whose college offers had been disrupted by family interference. No names, just a mission. And in the press release that followed, I included one line, inspired by a personal story of sabotage and perseverance. That release made the rounds. Tech sites picked it up. A few education nonprofits reached out. Then a journalist contacted me, just a small independent voice who loved human stories. "Would you be open to an interview?" she asked. I said yes. We met at a coffee shop. I told her about my work, my philosophy, my growth. And finally, I shared the story of the college letter. Vaguely. No names. No revenge. Just facts. The headline when the story dropped? "Sabotaged by family. This developer turned betrayal into a mission to help others." It wasn't viral, but it struck a chord. I got messages from strangers, kids who felt crushed by their families, parents who admitted to controlling their children's paths. One teacher told me she printed the article for her students. And then I got the email from my dad. "You need to take that story down. You're humiliating us." I didn't reply. 3 days later, my mom called. I let it ring. Then another message. "Do you have any idea how this makes Jessica look?" That made me laugh. Because for once, it wasn't about Jessica. It was about me. The fallout wasn't dramatic. Not immediately. They didn't disown me. They didn't scream. They just stopped calling. I was uninvited from the next family gathering, quietly removed from the group chat. My mom posted a passive-aggressive Facebook update about kids who aired dirty laundry for clout. But I'd already done what I came to do. And the real reward? It wasn't the applause, or the article, or the subtle panic in my dad's voice. It was the email I got from Columbia. "Given recent developments and your inspiring story, we'd be honored to invite you to speak at our alumni series. We know you didn't attend, but we believe your voice belongs in our halls." I cried when I read it. Because after all the silence, all the dismissal, all the gaslighting, I was seen. Not as Jessica's brother. Not as the failure. Not as the background. Just as me. I didn't need revenge to be cruel. I needed it to be clear. And the day I stood at that Columbia podium, years after they tried to erase my future, I ended my talk with one sentence I'd waited my whole life to say. I didn't come here because of my family. I came here in spite of them. And the room stood for me. Not her. Not them. Me.